It started with whispers in the cabin. The kind of whispers that burn through silence, sharper than the hum of the jet engines. A little black girl, maybe 9 years old, sat clutching a boarding pass in her hand. First class. Paid in full. She'd done nothing wrong. She was smiling, innocent, excited for her very first flight, sitting up front where the rich and powerful normally sat. But the smile didn't last. A flight attendant, neat uniform pressed tight, lips curved in something colder than a smile, bent low and whispered words that would sting for the rest of her life. "This section isn't for you. You need to move." The child froze. Passengers stared. Some shook their heads. Some smirked. But the cruelest sound came from the attendant's next words. "You people don't belong up here." And just like that, an ordinary flight became a flashpoint of humiliation, pride, and a father's unshakable resolve. Because the man waiting at the gate, her father, he wasn't just anyone. He was about to change everything. Airports are strange places. A mix of joy and stress, goodbyes and reunions. For most travelers, they're just a passage from one life moment to the next. But that day, this airport, this ordinary departure gate, was about to become the stage for something far greater than a family trip. The girl's name was Nia, 9 years old, wide-eyed, a notebook always tucked under her arm. She loved to sketch clouds and birds, writing tiny notes about how one day she'd fly above them all. For her, flying wasn't just travel. It was freedom. Her father, David, a man quiet in posture but towering in presence. He worked hard, built his wealth from nothing, brick by brick. Most people never knew his full story. They saw the tailored suits, the sharp watch, the quiet confidence. They didn't see the boy from the south side who once slept on a mattress with springs poking through, dreaming of something better. This trip was supposed to be a celebration. David had promised his daughter, "Next time, we fly first class. Because you deserve it." He meant every word. But fate, and prejudice, had other plans. Nia had boarded early, her father handling a quick call at the gate. She found her seat, 1A, by the window. She ran her hand along the cool leather, adjusting the seatbelt. For a moment, she felt like the world had opened its doors. Then came the shadow. The flight attendant loomed over her. Blonde bun, polished smile hiding venom. She looked down at Nia as if she'd spilled into the wrong world. "Sweetheart, these seats are reserved. Economy is that way." Nia blinked, confused. She held out her ticket. "But it says here, first class." The attendant didn't even glance at the boarding pass. She waved her hand as if shooing away a child from a grown-up's table. Passengers glanced, pretending not to hear, but eyes lingered. One man chuckled under his breath. Another woman whispered, "Unbelievable," but said nothing louder. The girl's throat tightened. Her small voice cracked. "My dad. He bought this seat for me." The attendant's reply cut like glass. "Your dad must have made a mistake." David stepped onto the plane just as the scene unfolded. He saw his daughter shrinking into the seat, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. He saw the attendant's stiff smile, the mocking tilt of her head, and something inside him went still. David didn't yell. He didn't curse. He walked forward slowly, every step deliberate. His silence was heavier than thunder. He placed a hand on Nia's shoulder, steady and firm. Then, in a voice calm enough to chill the entire cabin, he asked, "Is there a problem here?" The attendant hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the father's tailored suit, the shine of his cufflinks. For a second, she faltered. But arrogance doesn't die easy. She forced a smile. "Sir, I was just explaining. This section is usually for..." "Usually for who?" David cut in, voice sharp but controlled. "Because the boarding pass says seat 1A. That's my daughter. That's her seat." A silence stretched across the cabin. Passengers leaned in, eyes darting back and forth. Everyone wanted to see how far this would go. The attendant's face flushed red. She stammered something about company policy and miscommunication. But it was too late. David had seen enough. In that frozen moment, two stories collided. The story of a child taught too soon that even innocence could be doubted, and the story of a man who had clawed his way out of poverty, only to watch the world try to humiliate his little girl. David guided Nia back into her seat. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His silence carried the weight of storms. But in his mind, something shifted. This wasn't just about a flight. This wasn't about one rude attendant. This was about power. And David had plenty of it. What the passengers didn't know, what the flight attendant never imagined, was that David wasn't just another well-dressed man. He was one of the most successful private investors in the country. He owned blocks of real estate, tech startups, and silent stakes in businesses that touched everyday lives. His fortune was quiet but immense. And for years, he'd stayed in the background, building, watching, calculating. But that day, humiliation became fuel. As the plane soared through the clouds, David's mind worked faster than the engines. Every cruel word replayed in his head. Every look of dismissal toward his daughter cut deeper. By the time the plane landed, his decision was made. If they thought his little girl didn't belong in first class, then he'd make sure she belonged to the skies themselves. Weeks passed. The incident made small ripples online, shared through passenger cell phone clips. A few blogs covered it. Outrage flickered but faded quickly. But David, he didn't forget. Behind closed doors, meetings began. Silent bids. Negotiations in boardrooms high above the city. Papers signed under strict confidentiality. Until one morning, the headlines broke. A private investor had just acquired majority shares in the very airline where the humiliation took place. That investor? David. And on the front page of nearly every business paper, his photo appeared, calm, unsmiling, with his daughter Nia by his side. The same girl once told she didn't belong. The flight attendant lost her job quietly. The airline issued a statement, full of polished apologies. But David didn't stop there. He restructured policies, mandated diversity training, implemented a zero-tolerance clause for discrimination. And every first-class cabin across the airline now carried a plaque, discreetly engraved, "For Nia, who belongs anywhere she chooses." Passengers whispered when they saw it. Some smiled. Some rolled their eyes. But for Nia, it was proof. Her father had turned shame into legacy. But here's the thing about power. It never comes without enemies. Behind the scenes, whispers began again, different this time. Rivals. Jealous board members. Former executives. They saw David not as a savior but as a threat. And slowly, silently, the same arrogance that once dismissed him began plotting against him. Because in their eyes, he hadn't just bought an airline. He had broken an unspoken rule. A black man, rewriting the skies. The story doesn't end neatly. It never does. David's empire grew, but so did the shadows circling around him. Investigations, lawsuits, media storms, each one threatening to pull him down. Through it all, Nia grew older, stronger. Her dreams of flying never wavered. She studied hard, telling her father she would one day pilot the very planes he now owned. But somewhere, in smoky boardrooms and whispered phone calls, enemies plotted. And the question remains, would David's empire rise higher than the clouds, or come crashing down under the weight of those who couldn't stand to see him soar? One thing is certain. That day on the plane, when a flight attendant tried to shrink a little girl into silence, she planted a seed that grew into an empire. And whether the world likes it or not, the skies now belong to her. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't loud. It isn't cruel. It isn't even immediate. Sometimes, the greatest revenge is building so high that no one can ever tell you again where you don't belong. When the world tells you you don't belong, you don't beg for a seat at their table. You build your own. You rise higher. You prove them wrong, not with anger, but with legacy. And that's exactly what David did. For his daughter. For every child who's ever been told, not here, not you. He made the skies theirs. Power has a strange weight. It feels like victory at first. But in the quiet hours, it feels like a target on your back. David thought buying the airline would end the story. He thought he had silenced the world's cruelty by giving his daughter the sky itself. But little did he know, he had only written the first chapter. Because in boardrooms far away from flashing cameras, men in expensive suits sat with clenched jaws, muttering the same phrase again and again. He's not supposed to be here. It began quietly. First, it was subtle leaks to the media, rumors of mismanagement, whispers of unfit leadership. Articles slipped into business journals questioning whether David had the experience to run an airline. Next came the lawsuits. Paperwork stacked high with claims from former employees, alleging everything from discrimination to misused funds. None of it true. All of it costly. And behind those lawsuits, the very people who once shook David's hand in false congratulations. They hadn't forgiven him for rewriting the skies. But David wasn't a man who folded under pressure. He met each attack with silence and strategy. While the media painted him as reckless, he quietly expanded routes, modernized fleets, and turned profits that stunned analysts. Yet through all his victories, one thing weighed on him heavier than the lawsuits and the headlines. It was Nia. She was growing older. No longer the little girl clutching a boarding pass with trembling hands. Now, she was a teenager, sharp and determined. And she was beginning to understand that her father's empire came with shadows. One night, she asked him a question that silenced even David. "Daddy, is it my fault they hate you?" The room went still. David looked into his daughter's eyes, the same wide eyes that once filled with tears on that plane. He wanted to say no. He wanted to protect her from the truth. But he couldn't lie. "They don't hate me because of you, baby. They hate me because they can't stand to see us where they said we'd never be." Still, the attacks grew louder. Anonymous threats. Strange cars parked outside their home. Investors pulling out under pressure from competitors. And then, the unthinkable. One of the airline's new planes suffered a mechanical failure mid-flight. Emergency landing. No lives lost, but panic spread instantly. Headlines screamed about safety concerns. Stocks dipped overnight. Investigators called it an accident. David wasn't so sure, because deep in his gut, he knew. This wasn't coincidence. This was war. Meanwhile, Nia was chasing her own dream. She had begun training as a pilot, pushing against every stereotype, every doubt thrown her way. She was the only black girl in her aviation program, the only one carrying the weight of a father's empire on her shoulders. Every day, she felt the whispers behind her back. She's only here because of her daddy. But every day, she showed up anyway. And as the skies tried to push her out, she grew stronger. One evening, David sat alone in his study, staring at stacks of legal papers. His phone buzzed. A private number. He answered. A voice, distorted and cold, whispered, "You should have stayed in your place." Then the line went dead. David sat frozen. He realized this wasn't just business. This wasn't just rivalry. This was personal. And if he wasn't careful, it would cost more than money. It would cost his daughter everything. But David wasn't afraid. He'd spent his whole life fighting uphill battles. The difference now, he had the resources. He had the power. And most importantly, he had a reason greater than himself. From that night on, David launched a counterstrike. He hired investigators, traced the leaks, uncovered the shell companies funding the lawsuits. One by one, the enemies who hid behind corporate walls were dragged into the light. It was brutal. It was messy. But it was necessary. Still, the war was far from over. Because just as David struck back, Nia faced her own test. Her first solo flight. All eyes were on her, some waiting for her to succeed, most waiting for her to fail. She climbed into the cockpit, hands steady, heart racing. Her father's empire hung like a shadow behind her. As the plane lifted into the sky, Nia whispered to herself, "They told me I didn't belong. But look where I am now." The clouds parted. The sun broke through. For a moment, the world felt quiet again. But peace never lasts. As Nia soared higher, David's enemies made their boldest move yet. A coordinated smear campaign, false financial reports, and a sudden government probe threatening to ground his entire airline. It was no longer about humiliation. It was about destruction. And David faced the hardest question of his life. Should he fight harder and risk dragging his daughter into the storm? Or should he walk away and let the skies fall silent? The story pauses here, because history has shown us one truth. When the powerful feel threatened, they will stop at nothing to erase what they fear. David gave his daughter the skies. But the skies are vast, and storms are always waiting. Will his empire rise beyond their reach? Or will the same arrogance that once tried to deny his daughter a seat finally bring them crashing down? Sometimes, fighting for dignity means more than just claiming your seat. It means holding on to it, even when the world tries to shake you loose. It means understanding that legacies are built not in quiet victories, but in storms weathered, battles fought, and skies reclaimed. And in the end, the question isn't whether you belong. The question is whether you'll keep rising, even when they try to bring you down.